That's great. Okay. So, hello, live. And the lighting might be a little bit weird in here. It's also very late or very early, depending on how you think about it. My name is Patsy Shore, also Ray Me Mama, also Patricia Shore on LinkedIn. And I am going through this John C. Maxwell book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, very slowly. And I've been absent for a while, so I'm getting back in the groove now. The law of navigation says anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Uh-oh, I have to let the dog in. So the law of navigation says that. And it talks about, I want you to get this book and follow along. And we can talk about it and we can comment on it. And I've got permission from the author. It's all good and wonderful. But he talks here about Amundsen, who was the Roald, I guess it's like Roald Dahl, the guy who wrote Roald Dahl. I think it's spelled the same, but it's Roald Amundsen, who was the first man to reach the North Pole, and how he charted his course carefully. Let me let the dog in. Come on in, Roscoe, please. This dog has me trained, so I have to get a treat for him to come in. But I very much want him to come in. I'm not much of a leader when it comes to Roscoe, but as long as he is in for the evening, that is a good thing. So now I'm back to the almost back to the law of navigation, and I could start all over, but hey, this is really what's happening. Okay, our kids are all grown up and working at a Boy Scout camp this summer. So, also, I am going to block all accounts that are distracting, because I'm also doing TikTok and YouTube, which I learned in the Legacy Builders program, which I would highly suggest that you get on my email list, and I can tell you more about that program. And I can talk more about it at a later time. But right now, I want to look at the law of navigation. And so it gives an example of Roald Amundsen, who was the first person to reach the North Pole, first man to reach the North Pole. Oh, I'm sorry. That was his desire. That was his desire. However, he learned that Robert Peary had beaten him there. He changed his goal and headed toward the other end of the earth, north or south. He knew his planning would pay off. Before his team ever set off, it's a good thing he didn't look for the North Pole, that he just did some research on that and found out the deal, right? How many times have you acted impulsively? A lot. So being a good leader and a good navigator requires some research sometimes. So anyway, before his team ever set off, Amundsen had assessed the coming challenges and painstakingly planned his trip. He studied the methods of the indigenous Arctic people and other experienced cold weather travelers, and he determined that their best course of action would be to transport all their equipment and supplies by dog sled. When he assembled his team, he chose expert skiers and dog handlers. His strategy was simple: The dogs would do most of the work as the group traveled 15 to 20 miles in a 6-hour period each day. That would afford both the dogs and the men plenty of time for daily rest prior to the following day's travel. Amundsen's forethought and attention to detail were incredible. He located and stocked supply depots all along the intended route. That way, they would not have to carry every bit of their supplies with them the whole trip. He also equipped his people with the best gear possible. Before he set off, Amundsen had taken the trip in his mind, carefully considering every possible aspect of the journey, thinking it through and planning accordingly, and it paid off. The worst problem they experienced on their trip was an infected tooth one man needed to have extracted. So that's what happens when you plan. And when you don't live by the law of navigation. And he talks about Robert Scott, a British naval officer who had previously done some exploring in the Antarctic area. Scott's expedition was the antithesis of Amundsen's. Their problems began when the motors on the sledges stopped working only 5 days into the trip. The ponies did not fare well either in these frigid temperatures. When they reached the foot of the Transantarctic mountains, all of the poor animals had to be killed. As a result, the team members themselves ended up hauling the 200-pound sledges. It was arduous work. Scott had not given enough attention to the team's other equipment either. Everyone on the team developed frostbite and became snowblind because of inadequate clothing and goggles. The team was always low on food and water. The depots of supplies were inadequately stocked, too far apart and poorly marked, making them very difficult to find. Because they were continually low on fuel to melt snow, everyone became dehydrated. Making things even worse was Scott's last-minute decision to take along a fifth man, even though they had prepared enough supplies for only 4. So that's sort of the opposite of what Amundsen did. And we see who the better navigator was. After covering a grueling 800 miles in 10 weeks, Scott's exhausted group finally arrived at the South Pole on January 17, 1912. There they found the Norwegian flag flapping in the wind and a letter from Amundsen. The other well-led team had beaten them there by more than a month. What lessons can we learn from this story? Who is the better navigator and why? I would love to hear comments. And please remember to pick up the book from John C. Maxwell, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Da da da.